the autumn moon's secret garden. It was Halloween night, and the forest lay draped in a cloak of shadows, its towering trees silhouetted against the soft, glowing light of the harvest moon. Elowen moved silently along the winding path, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of fallen leaves that blanketed the ground. The air was crisp and cool, tinged with the earthy scent of moss and decaying wood, and every breath she took seemed to carry with it the essence of autumn, the bittersweet reminder of things ending and the promise of new beginnings. The forest around her was a tapestry of color, the trees ablaze with hues of scarlet, amber, and gold. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting long, delicate shadows that shifted and danced as the wind whispered softly through the leaves. There was something magical about the woods on Halloween, a sense of anticipation that made the air feel charged, alive. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for the night to unfold its secrets. Elowen, a quiet and introspective wanderer, had always felt drawn to nights like this, nights when the veil between worlds seemed thin, when the familiar paths of the forest took on a strange, otherworldly quality. She had walked these woods many times before, exploring its hidden trails and secret glades, but tonight felt different. There was a hum of energy in the air, a quiet pull that urged her onward, guiding her deeper into the woods. She followed the path without hesitation, her eyes scanning the darkened trees for something. She wasn't sure what. And then, just as the path began to curve toward the heart of the forest, she saw it. An old wrought iron gate standing at the edge of a clearing. The gate was covered in a thick tangle of ivy, its metal bars twisted and rusted with age. It looked as though it hadn't been opened in decades, perhaps even centuries. But tonight, on this magical Halloween night, the gate stood slightly ajar, the narrow gap just wide enough to see what lay beyond. Elowen's heart quickened as she stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. Through the gap, she caught a glimpse of something strange and wonderful. A hidden garden bathed in the soft, silvery light of the moon. The garden was wild and overgrown, its paths choked with tangled vines and dense underbrush. Tall, dark trees loomed at its edges, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, casting eerie shadows across the ground. But there was beauty there too, a haunting, ethereal beauty that made her want to reach out and touch it, to step through the gate and lose herself in its enchanted depths. Elowen hesitated, one hand resting lightly on the cold metal of the gate. She knew these woods well, knew every trail and hollow, every hidden nook, but she had never seen this garden before. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere, conjured by the moonlight and the magic of Halloween itself. There was something else, too, a soft, steady glow that seemed to emanate from deep within the garden, casting a pale, golden light over the shadowed paths. The glow pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of some great, sleeping creature, drawing her in with an inexplicable sense of longing. She leaned closer, peering through the narrow gap, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. It was beautiful, mysterious, and it was calling to her. Without another thought, Elowen pushed the gate open, the rusted hinges creaking softly in the stillness. The moment she stepped through, the air around her seemed to change, the night growing warmer and the shadows deeper. It was as if she had crossed a threshold between worlds, leaving behind the familiar forest paths and entering a place that existed only in dreams and whispers. The garden stretched out before her, a labyrinth of twisting trails and hidden clearings, shrouded in an otherworldly mist that glowed softly under the light of the Halloween moon. Strange flowers bloomed in the underbrush, their petals glowing faintly in the darkness, and the tall grasses swayed gently in a breeze she couldn't feel. The glow she had seen from the gate was brighter now, pulsing softly from somewhere deep within the garden, guiding her onward. Elowen took a deep breath, letting the magic of the place wash over her. She could feel it, alive and vibrant, humming softly beneath her skin. The pull was stronger now, an unspoken invitation that whispered through the air, urging her to explore, to uncover the secrets hidden within the garden's tangled paths. She glanced back once, her gaze lingering on the dark silhouette of the gate, standing alone at the edge of the clearing. It seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight, as if caught between two worlds, half there and half not. But the forest beyond looked distant now, unreal, as if it belonged to another time, another place. Turning away, Elowen took her first step down the narrow, overgrown path that wound through the heart of the garden. Whatever this place was, whatever magic had brought it into being, she knew one thing for certain. The garden was meant to be found only on this one night, on Halloween, under the light of the autumn moon. And she, Elowen, had been the one chosen to find it. As Elowen stepped further into the garden, the air around her seemed to hum softly, vibrating with an energy that pulsed through the earth beneath her feet. The path was narrow and winding, choked with dense underbrush, and flanked by tall, twisting vines that curled around the trunks of ancient trees. She moved slowly, her eyes wide with wonder, taking in the strange, ethereal beauty of the place. It was unlike any garden she had ever seen. The plants seemed almost alive, glowing faintly under the pale light of the Halloween moon. Flowers with delicate, translucent petals bloomed along the edges of the path, their colors shifting and shimmering like liquid gold and silver. Some were no larger than her thumb, tiny bursts of white and blue that glowed softly in the shadows. Others towered above her, their blossoms wide and round like lanterns, casting a gentle, shimmering light over the twisted branches and tangled roots. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against one of the blooms. It was cool and smooth to the touch, the petals softer than silk. As her fingertips made contact, the flower shivered slightly, releasing a faint, sweet scent that filled the air around her. The fragrance was intoxicating, a heady mix of lavender and jasmine, and it seemed to weave through her senses, drawing her deeper into the garden's embrace. The trees, too, were unlike any she had seen before. Their bark shimmered in the moonlight, glistening like polished stone, and their leaves, golden and scarlet and deep burnished copper, shimmered softly, as if each one were edged in liquid silver. They rustled gently in the breeze, filling the air with a soft, musical sound, like the distant chime of bells. As she walked, the vines that lined the path seemed to shift and sway, their tendrils curling and twisting in time with the rhythm of the wind. They moved almost as if they were alive, bending toward her as she passed, brushing lightly against her arms and shoulders. Elowen shivered, but it was not from fear. There was no malice here, no sense of danger. Only a strange, welcoming magic that wrapped around her like a warm embrace, inviting her to explore, to linger. The deeper she ventured, the more vibrant the garden became. Colors seemed to bleed from every corner. Deep purples and fiery reds, soft blues and radiant yellows, all glowing softly under the silver light of the moon. The plants glistened with dew, each droplet reflecting tiny fragments of the garden around it, creating a kaleidoscope of shimmering colors that filled the air. But it wasn't just the plants that were alive. As Elowen moved further along the path, she began to notice small creatures flitting through the underbrush. Tiny birds, no larger than her palm, darted between the branches, their feathers glowing with a faint, iridescent light. They looked like living stars, each one shimmering in the darkness as they danced through the air. She watched, mesmerized, as they wove intricate patterns around her, their movements graceful and precise. Moths with wings as thin as gossamer fluttered past, their delicate forms glowing softly, like falling leaves caught in the moon's glow. They drifted through the air in lazy spirals, their wings catching the light and scattering it in 1,000 tiny sparks. As they passed, the air around her seemed to sparkle and shimmer, filled with the faint, ethereal glow of their presence. And there were other creatures too, stranger, more elusive ones that watched her silently from the shadows. She caught glimpses of them out of the corner of her eye, a pair of glowing eyes peering at her from behind a cluster of vines. A soft rustling sound as something small and nimble darted between the roots of a tree. But whenever she turned to look, the creatures melted away, their forms blending seamlessly with the shadows, leaving only a faint trace of magic in their wake. The deeper Elowen ventured into the garden, the more the world seemed to shift and change around her. The narrow paths twisted and turned like a living labyrinth, the dense foliage and tangled vines growing thicker with each step. Strange, ethereal flowers bloomed in the undergrowth, their petals shimmering in the moonlight, casting delicate patterns of light and shadow across the mossy ground. The air was filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the faint, melodic hum of insects that glowed softly in the darkness, their tiny forms flitting through the air like living embers. She wandered slowly, her senses alive with wonder, taking in every detail. The way the light of the Halloween moon seemed to make the colors of the garden more vibrant, more vivid. The way the air seemed to pulse softly with an unseen energy. It was as if the garden itself were a living, breathing thing, its magic woven into every leaf, every blade of grass, every drop of dew that clung to the flowers and vines. And yet, there was a feeling of quiet sadness here too, a sense of something lost, something forgotten. It lingered in the shadows, hidden among the roots and branches, like the memory of a dream that had faded with the dawn. Elowen turned down a narrow, winding path, the soft glow of the moonlight guiding her way. The path led her to a small, secluded clearing, its edges framed by tall, dark hedges that loomed overhead like silent sentinels. In the center of the clearing, surrounded by a dense ring of overgrown ivy, stood an old stone bench. The bench was weathered and worn, its surface cracked and moss-covered, as if it had stood there for centuries, untouched by time. Around it, half buried in the underbrush, were a series of statues, ancient, crumbling figures that peered out from the shadows with hollow, unseeing eyes. They were draped in vines and tendrils of ivy, their features eroded by age and covered in a thick layer of lichen. Some were barely recognizable, twisted shapes that looked more like gnarled tree trunks than human figures. Others retained a ghostly semblance of form, their faces smooth and expressionless, their eyes empty and staring. Elowen stepped closer, her gaze drifting over the statues. There was something hauntingly beautiful about them, a sense of quiet melancholy that seemed to seep into the very air. They looked as if they had once been guardians of the garden, protectors of its secrets. But now, they stood silent and forgotten, their purpose lost to the passage of time. Her gaze shifted to the stone bench, and she froze. There, resting gently on the moss-covered surface, was a delicate, glowing moonflower. The flower was unlike any she had seen before. Its petals were pure white, shimmering faintly in the darkness, and its center glowed with a soft, golden light that seemed to pulse in time with the rhythm of her heartbeat. It looked almost fragile, its slender stem bending slightly under the weight of its bloom. And yet, there was a strength to it, a quiet, resilient beauty that made her want to reach out and touch it, to cradle it in her hands. Beside the flower, half hidden in the thick moss, was an old, worn journal. Elowen hesitated, her gaze flicking between the flower and the journal. The leather cover was cracked and faded, its edges frayed and worn, as if it had been left out in the elements for many years. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the spine. The leather was cool and smooth, the texture rough under her touch. Carefully, almost reverently, she lifted the journal from its resting place and opened it to the first page. The paper was thin and yellowed with age, its edges curled and brittle. But the ink was still legible, the handwriting delicate and precise. Elowen's eyes widened as she scanned the lines, her heart racing. The entries were written by other travelers, other wanderers who, like her, had stumbled upon the garden on Halloween night. Each entry told a different story, a different experience. Some spoke of the beauty of the garden, the way its colors seemed to dance and shimmer in the moonlight. Others spoke of the creatures that lived within its borders, the glowing birds, the fluttering moths, the gentle spirits that watched silently from the shadows. But one thing was clear. The garden only appeared on this one night, on Halloween, when the autumn moon was full. Elowen's breath caught in her throat as she read the words, her pulse fluttering. The garden was hidden from the world, concealed by a magic that only revealed itself on this one night each year. And those who found it, those who were drawn to its gates, were chosen. Chosen by what? Or by whom? The journal didn't say. She turned the pages slowly, her fingers trembling as she skimmed the entries. There were sketches, too, delicate drawings of flowers and trees, of strange glowing creatures that flitted through the air like living wisps of light. One entry described a pond that shimmered under the moonlight, its surface dotted with tiny, luminous lilies that bloomed only under the gaze of the full moon. Another spoke of a hidden grove, where the trees seemed to sing softly in the wind, their branches swaying in a silent, mesmerizing dance. But it was the final entry that made her heart stop. The handwriting was different here, bolder, more hurried, as if the writer had been racing against time. The ink was smudged in places, the lines crooked and uneven, but the words were clear. The moonlit fountain. the heart of the garden. It is said to hold the power to heal, to restore what has been lost. But only those who are truly in tune with nature can find it. Only those who can hear the whisper of the trees and feel the pulse of the earth will be guided to its waters. Elowen stared at the words, her mind spinning. A fountain, a hidden fountain, buried somewhere within the garden's depths. A place where the balance of nature and magic was preserved, where the very essence of life itself was said to flow. It was a place of power, a place that could restore and heal both the earth and the soul. But how could she find it? How could she, a mere wanderer, hope to uncover such a secret? The answer, she realized, lay within the journal itself. The other travelers had found glimpses of the fountain, felt its presence in the rustling of the leaves, in the shimmer of the water, in the soft, steady pulse of the garden's magic. But none had been able to reach it. None had been able to fully unlock the mystery of the garden. Elowen closed the journal slowly, her gaze drifting back to the glowing moonflower beside her. It shimmered softly in the moonlight, its petals trembling slightly in the breeze. Perhaps it was a sign, a guide. Taking a deep breath, Elowen tucked the journal carefully into her satchel and reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the flower's delicate petals. The moment she touched it, a soft, warm glow spread through her, filling her with a sense of calm and purpose. She glanced around the clearing, her eyes narrowing as she took in the statues, the twisted vines, the soft rustle of leaves in the darkness. She would find the fountain. She would uncover the secret hidden at the heart of the garden. The garden had called her here for a reason. And on this magical Halloween night, under the light of the autumn moon, she would not turn away. The journal's words echoed softly in Elowen's mind as she stepped away from the clearing, the image of the mysterious fountain lingering like a dream on the edges of her thoughts. She had read about hidden places before, secret groves and moonlit ponds, places where magic pooled like water and nature's breath flowed like a living thing. But none had ever felt so real, so close, as this garden did on this Halloween night. The moonflower, still glowing softly in her hand, pulsed gently, casting a pale, silvery light over the path ahead. Elowen knew, deep in her heart, that the garden was guiding her. The path wound deeper into the woods, twisting and turning through dense thickets of brambles and flowering vines. The flowers, their petals shimmering like jewels, leaned toward her as she passed, their glow brightening in response to the moonflower's light. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the faint, distant trill of nightbirds. It was as if the entire garden were holding its breath, waiting for her to take the next step. She moved slowly, carefully, letting the soft glow of the moonflower guide her way. Every now and then, the light would flicker, shifting slightly to one side or the other, and she would follow, trusting in the subtle pull of its magic. The garden seemed to change as she walked. Paths that had been there moments before disappeared, swallowed up by dense underbrush, while new trails appeared, their surfaces lined with glowing moss that shone like the surface of a still pond. The deeper she ventured, the more vibrant the garden became. The trees, their trunks wide and gnarled, seemed to arch protectively overhead, their branches forming a canopy of gold and silver leaves that shimmered softly under the moonlight. The ground beneath her feet was covered in a thick carpet of moss, its surface cool and springy, and every step she took sent tiny sparks of light dancing through the air. As she walked, she began to notice small creatures flitting through the trees. Glowing moths drifted lazily on the breeze, their wings fluttering like tiny lanterns, while birds with iridescent feathers sang softly from the branches above. Foxes, their fur glowing with a soft bluish light, peered out from the underbrush, their eyes watchful and curious. And here and there, hidden among the shadows, she caught glimpses of something more. Small, slender figures that darted through the foliage, their forms shimmering like water, their movements graceful and quick. She paused beside a cluster of twisted oaks, her gaze drawn to a pair of glowing eyes that watched her from the branches above. It was a bird, small and delicate, with feathers like spun glass and eyes that glittered like stars. It tilted its head, studying her intently, and then, in a voice as soft as the wind through the leaves, it spoke. "Why do you wander here, traveler? What do you seek on this night of Halloween, when the moon is full and the veil is thin?" Elowen blinked, surprised. The bird's voice was clear and musical, like the chime of a distant bell, and it filled the air with a strange, soothing warmth. She hesitated, then held up the moonflower, its petals glowing softly in the darkness. "I seek the fountain," she replied quietly. "The fountain that lies hidden at the heart of the garden. Do you know the way?" The bird fluttered its wings, its gaze drifting to the moonflower in her hand. "The fountain is not easily found," it murmured, its voice tinged with a note of sadness. "Many have sought it, but few have reached its waters. It is a place of balance, a place where the magic of the world gathers and flows, and only those who are truly in tune with nature's song can find its path." Elowen frowned slightly, her fingers tightening around the moonflower's stem. "But the garden called me here," she said softly. "The flower, it guides me. Doesn't that mean I'm meant to find it?" The bird tilted its head, considering. "Perhaps," it murmured thoughtfully, "or perhaps the garden is testing you, seeing if you are worthy of the secrets it holds." With that, the bird spread its delicate wings and fluttered away, disappearing into the branches above. Elowen watched it go, her heart fluttering with uncertainty. Was the bird right? Was she truly meant to find the fountain? Or was this just another test, a trial to see if she was worthy of the garden's gifts? But even as the doubts whispered through her mind, the moonflower pulsed gently in her hand, its light steady and strong. Elowen took a deep breath, letting the flower's warmth fill her chest, and continued down the path. The garden seemed to shift and change around her, its paths weaving in and out of the shadows, winding deeper into the heart of the woods. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of a great cathedral. The air was thick with the scent of pine and moss, and every now and then, a soft breeze would stir the leaves, sending tiny sparks of light dancing through the darkness. As she walked, she encountered more creatures, gentle spirits that drifted through the trees like wisps of smoke, their forms shifting and flickering in the moonlight. They watched her silently, their eyes glowing softly in the darkness, and though they did not speak, she could feel their presence, their quiet, watchful gaze. One of the spirits, a small, delicate figure, with long, flowing hair and eyes like liquid silver, hovered beside her for a moment, its form shimmering faintly in the moonlight. It reached out a slender hand, brushing lightly against her shoulder, and Elowen felt a surge of warmth spread through her chest, a sense of calm and peace that wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. "Trust in the path, child of the woods," the spirit whispered, its voice barely more than a breath of wind. "The garden's magic is ancient and wise. It will lead you where you are meant to go." Elowen nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the spirit's glowing form. "But what if I'm not worthy? What if worthiness is not determined by deeds or words?" the spirit interrupted gently. "It is a matter of the heart, a matter of whether you can see the beauty in the smallest flower, the magic in the simplest leaf, whether you can feel the pulse of life that flows through every blade of grass, every drop of rain, every breath of wind." With that, the spirit drifted away, its form dissolving into a swirl of light and shadow. Elowen stood there for a long moment, her heart racing, the spirit's words echoing softly in her mind. She took a deep breath, her gaze drifting over the darkened woods. The garden was testing her, guiding her, but it was also something more. It was speaking to her, revealing its secrets piece by piece, moment by moment. The moonflower pulsed gently in her hand, its light growing brighter, and Elowen felt the pull of its magic tugging at her soul. She turned and continued down the path, her steps light and sure. The garden shifted around her, its paths weaving and curling like a living maze, but she did not falter. She could feel it now, the quiet, steady call of the fountain, a soft, gentle pulse that resonated deep within her chest. It was close, closer than it had ever been. With a final deep breath, she stepped forward, the path ahead widening into a soft, glowing trail that led toward the heart of the garden. She was almost there. The path ahead of Elowen widened into a soft, glowing trail, its surface lined with delicate, luminous flowers that swayed gently in the breeze. The moonflower in her hand pulsed softly, its light growing brighter, as if sensing that its journey was nearing an end. Elowen's heart quickened as she moved forward, her footsteps light and soundless on the mossy ground. The garden around her seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. And then the path opened into a clearing. Elowen gasped softly, her eyes widening in awe. Before her, nestled in the very heart of the garden, was a moonlit fountain. The fountain was a simple, elegant structure, its stone surface smooth and unadorned, yet it radiated a quiet, serene beauty that seemed to transcend time. It was circular, its edges lined with intricately carved runes that glowed faintly in the soft light of the full moon overhead. At the center, a delicate stream of water bubbled up, shimmering like liquid silver, its surface rippling gently as it caught the moon's light. Surrounding the fountain were clusters of blooming moonflowers, their petals glowing softly, like tiny stars scattered across the ground. The flowers' delicate stems bent and swayed, their blossoms turned upward as if reaching toward the sky. The air was filled with their sweet, intoxicating fragrance, mingling with the cool scent of the water, creating an atmosphere of peace and tranquility. Elowen stepped forward slowly, almost reverently, her gaze fixed on the fountain's still waters. The water was clear, so clear that she could see every ripple, every tiny disturbance on its surface. It seemed to mirror the night sky above, reflecting the full, glowing orb of the Halloween moon in perfect detail. The light of the moon shone brightly in the water, casting a pale, ethereal glow over the clearing, illuminating the surrounding trees and flowers in a soft, otherworldly light. The moment she reached the edge of the fountain, Elowen felt a deep, quiet calm settle over her, as if the garden itself were wrapping her in a comforting embrace. The worries and uncertainties that had tugged at her heart throughout the journey faded away, replaced by a profound sense of peace and clarity. She gazed into the fountain's waters, her reflection rippling softly in the silvery light. The fountain's magic was not grand or overwhelming. It did not blaze like fire or roar like thunder. Instead, it was gentle, steady, like the quiet whisper of leaves in the wind or the soft murmur of a stream flowing through the woods. It was the kind of magic that could easily go unnoticed, hidden in the background of the world's louder, more vibrant forces. But here, in the stillness of the garden, it was clear, undeniable, a quiet power that pulsed with life and renewal. Elowen knelt beside the fountain, her fingers trailing lightly over the surface of the water. It was cool and smooth, its touch sending tiny ripples spreading outward in delicate, concentric rings. She leaned closer, her gaze fixed on the reflection of the moon, and felt a soft, warm light begin to fill her chest. A feeling of understanding, of connection, of belonging. The garden had guided her here, shown her its secrets, not because she was special or powerful, but because she was willing to listen, willing to see the beauty in the smallest flower, the magic in the simplest leaf. The fountain was not a source of great power or a hidden treasure to be claimed. It was a symbol, a reminder of the balance that sustained the world, the quiet, steady magic that flowed through every tree, every stream, every breath of wind. Elowen closed her eyes, letting the feeling wash over her. The garden had taught her so much in its own quiet way, not through words or grand gestures, but through its very presence, through the rustling of leaves, the fluttering of moths, the soft glow of the moonflowers under the light of the autumn moon. It had shown her the beauty of simplicity, the power of stillness, the strength that lay in harmony and balance. She sat there for a long time, her eyes closed, her heart filled with the gentle, rhythmic pulse of the fountain's magic. The water murmured softly beside her, its ripples casting faint patterns of light across the mossy ground. The moon hung high above, its light washing over the garden in a soft, silvery glow, bathing the entire clearing in an aura of peace and serenity. Finally, as the first faint light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Elowen took a deep breath and rose to her feet. The moonflower in her hand flickered softly, its glow dimming slightly, as if sensing that its purpose had been fulfilled. She glanced around the clearing one last time, taking in every detail, the way the moonlight shimmered on the fountain's surface, the way the flowers swayed gently in the breeze, the way the air seemed to hum softly with the garden's magic. With a quiet smile, she turned and began to make her way back down the path, the moonflower's light guiding her steps. The garden seemed to shift around her, its paths realigning to lead her gently, yet surely, back to the gate. The creatures she had encountered along the way, the glowing birds, the watchful foxes, the silent spirits, appeared again, their eyes following her as she passed. But this time, there was no curiosity in their gaze, no caution, only a quiet understanding, a sense of farewell. As she reached the edge of the clearing, she saw the old gate standing silently in the distance, its metal bars glistening faintly in the early morning light. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and moss, and the first rays of the rising sun were just beginning to peek over the treetops, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Elowen paused beside the gate, her fingers resting lightly on the cool metal. She glanced back at the garden, at the winding paths and blooming flowers, at the soft glow of the moonlight fading slowly into the dawn. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a breath of wind. "For everything." The garden seemed to sigh softly in response, the leaves rustling gently in the breeze, the flowers trembling lightly on their stems. And then, as the first light of day broke over the horizon, the gate creaked softly, its hinges groaning as it began to close. Elowen stepped through, her heart aching with a strange, bittersweet longing. She watched as the gate swung shut behind her, the metal bars glimmering faintly in the morning light. For a moment, the garden remained visible, its paths and flowers glowing softly in the dawn's early light. And then, slowly, the image began to waver, to blur and fade, until there was nothing left but the shadowed outline of the forest, silent and still. Elowen took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. The garden was gone, hidden away once more, its secrets sealed until the next Halloween, when the autumn moon would shine bright and full again. But as she turned and began to walk back toward the village, the memory of the garden's beauty, its quiet, gentle magic, lingered in her heart, filling her with a sense of peace and purpose. The garden had disappeared, but its magic would stay with her always, a quiet reminder of the night she had spent under the light of the Halloween moon, in a place where nature and magic danced together in perfect harmony.